Hi guys, today I'm going to walk you through the two articles that you had to read, but I'm going to tell you right up front, I am not going to tell you what to think. I'm just going to kind of read them aloud and think aloud for you, but you're going to have to kind of listen and think for yourself about what to put into those graphic organizers, those 4A graphic organizers that you have to do, one for each article. So we're going to start with the first article, Romeo and Juliet is a terrible play and David Laveau can't change that, by Alyssa Rosenberg. Pretty much right from the title, you know where Alyssa is probably heading with her critique of the play, but let's see what she has to say. A new interracial production of Romeo and Juliet arrives on Broadway this September, starring Orlando Bloom and Condola Rashad. Director David Laveau decided to cast the lovers' families in alignment with their races, resulting in a much more diverse production. So why am I not cheering? Because despite the fact that its latest staging features a 36-year-old actor and a 26-year-old actress, Romeo and Juliet, a play about children, is full of terrible, deeply childish ideas about love. And as much as I want to see more interracial couples in pop culture and more diverse casts on stage and screen, I don't want them to see cast in material that is so horribly depressing. So we're going to pause right there. There's two things to point out about these opening paragraphs. One, I think it always helps to have a picture in the back of your head about who this writer is critiquing. So here's a picture of the two actors, Condola Rashad and Orlando Bloom. There's the director, David Laveau. You can see it says Romeo and Juliet in the background. But just so you see what this person is critiquing, the actors are a little bit older than the characters themselves, and it's an interracial couple. And you'll see that she's not so much critiquing that they're interracial, other than their age. Let's go back to the article. After these first two paragraphs, too, you should probably have a sense of Alyssa Rosenberg's claim, right? Just from these first two paragraphs, you should get a sense of what she is probably going to be talking about through the rest of her article. So let's see what's going on. Romeo and Juliet itself hasn't aged well. Well, we know it was written in the 1500s, so it's very old, and it's hard for something that old to age well. The story follows Juliet Capulet, who is 13 when she meets Romeo Montague at a party, falls head over heels in love with him, and marries him within a day of meeting him. Romeo's age isn't specified in the play, but the quickness with which he throws over a former flame for Juliet, that's Rosaline, we're going to come back to this childish label, doesn't suggest a particularly mature man. Maybe this works on the page when we're not forced to watch actors and actresses who are clearly in their 20s and 30s behave like early teenagers. But the effect is embarrassing and unsettling for today's theater audiences, perhaps already fretting over suspended adolescents and stunted millennials. So we're going to pause there. What did I write? Weird how we automatically assume these characters can make these decisions about love because of their context. No, they are still babies. Yeah, they were saying that Romeo's age isn't specified, but he just like ditches Rosaline and goes to Juliet. And we never really talk about how immature that decision is, but Alyssa Rosenberg is identifying that, yes, there's our first indication that Romeo is not that mature, and we know that from the get-go. And it doesn't matter whether it takes place in 1500 or 2017. Romeo and Juliet are babies, and they shouldn't make decisions like this that require a lot more maturity and wisdom. I also highlighted this sentence about today's theater audiences, perhaps already fretting over suspended adolescents and stunted millennials. I circled fretting and suspended and stunted because I want you to think about these three words, which words were used, and what tone that created, and what's the significance of using these words fret and suspend and stunt. How does that help Alyssa Rosenberg make her claim? Let's move on. Update the play to match the aged-up actors. Whoops. In the two main roles, and the plot still doesn't make a lot of sense. Why are the families fighting? What was the inciting incident? The absence of a reason does not mean that adaptations can fill in space that Shakespeare left behind, making the warring parties Puerto Rican and Polish American, for instance, or Israeli and Palestinian. But even then, having the two lovers kill themselves through a series of misunderstandings doesn't translate well in a setting that takes any sort of modern communications for granted. And it's hard to believe the couple, no matter how lovelorn, would lack the patience to wait 24 hours to get hitched. Not to mention the savvy to check up on a bad report from Verona. But beyond that, the vision of Romeo and Juliet's deaths uniting their families is an adolescent fantasy of death solving all problems. A won't they miss me when I'm gone pout. There's a reason that in the best modern riff on Romeo and Juliet, West Side Story, Maria lives after Tony's death to shame the Sharks and the Jets, her survival a seal on the truce between them. Dying is easy. Living to survive the consequences of your actions and to do the actual work of reconciliation is the hard part. An interracial Romeo and Juliet is nice, but Black actors and actresses deserve richer roles than Romeo and Juliet. All right, so let's go back up here. I pointed out that Shakespeare never really gave us a reason why the families were fighting, but that doesn't mean that directors can just kind of fill in the blanks for whatever they want. And they can't do it successfully just by making these people from different warring factions, whether it's race or country or belief or whatever. I also, you'll see throughout, I have these things childish, because her title about Romeo and Juliet is a terrible play. She opens up with this claim about it being childish, and I just kind of tracked where she supports her claim of it being childish. So think, why does Alyssa Rosenberg hate this play so much? And is it about race? What is she saying about race? What is she saying about the modern version? And what is she saying about the original version? Because she's kind of overlapping those three layers in her critique of it. Okay, so as you think about that shorter article, think about those questions. All right, so now that we've tackled the Alyssa Rosenberg article, let's now tackle Noah Berlatsky's article, In Defense of Romeo and Juliet. It's not childish, it's about childishness. So we know from the title where Noah Berlatsky is pretty much going to stand, so let's read on to really understand where he's coming from and why he's making this claim. I haven't read Romeo and Juliet since I was in high school 25 years ago. High school is, of course, a time of rampaging hormones and extravagant romantic angst. In theory, the perfect life moment to read Romeo and Juliet. In practice, I think my favorite character was Mercutio. I thought he was funny. So even from that opening paragraph, we can kind of get a sense of the tone that he's going to use. You might want to stop and just kind of make a little mental note where you think this is going to go with his writing style and tone about the play. Paragraph 2. I just reread the play last week, inspired by Alyssa Rosenberg's declaration at Slate that Romeo and Juliet is a terrible play. The comments section erupted in howls of outrage, but I was intrigued. He's talking about the comments section on Alyssa Rosenberg's article and how other people kind of all were fuming and typed in to let them know what they thought. Suddenly, I was curious to find out what I thought of a work I hadn't revisited in more than 2 decades. Rosenberg argued that Romeo and Juliet, a play about children, is full of terrible, deeply childish ideas about love. Juliet, Rosenberg reminds us, is 13. If you cast someone that age in the role now, the result is queasy. If you cast someone older, you end up with an adult actor behaving like she's a tween. Romeo's age is uncertain, but a lot of what he does is immature and adolescent as well. The lover's haste to marry strains credulity, which means it's like not believable. It seems, though Rosenberg doesn't quite say this, like a childish fantasy of love at first sight. Similarly, the reconciliation of the lovers' warring families upon their demise reads for Rosenberg as an adolescent fantasy of death solving all problems. So he just kind of summarized what Rosenberg was saying in that one little paragraph. He's just acknowledging that this is what she said, and now I'm going to move on to what I thought. Adolescent or not, though, I sure enjoyed reading it this time through. Romeo and Juliet's first meeting, for example, all by itself validates the romantic comedy genre. I'm wondering, did Shakespeare intend for his play to be a romantic comedy? I'm not sure. Romeo to Juliet. If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle fine as this, my lips two blushing pilgrims ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. Ah, good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this, for saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. Have not saints lips, and holy palmers too? Ay, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer. That is some searingly saucy banter there. Ay, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer, has to be one of the archest lines in all literature. I'm with Romeo. I'd fall in love with that. In short, now that I'm an adult, I appreciate the young lovers a good bit more than I did when I was their age. This may be counterintuitive, but also seems to be one of the main points of the play itself. A number of Rosenberg's commenters noted that Romeo and Juliet is deliberately about young love. This is no doubt true, but the play is also and insistently about age. The fact that Julia is 13, for example, is not just mentioned once. It comes up again and again. Moreover, the first time Juliet appears on stage, her aged comic nurse launches into a rambling anecdote about when her charge was a toddler, an anecdote that Juliet clearly finds both tedious and embarrassing. Juliet's youth, then, is adamantly established and also adamantly presented as a source of fascination for the elderly. Old and young remains an obsession throughout the play, but that obsession does not, interestingly, work in any single way. Sometimes being young means being rash and changeable, as when Romeo switches his hyperbolic affections from Rosaline to Juliet. Sometimes it means being a hope for the future, as when the friar marries the couple to try to end the feud between Montagues and Capulets. There are passages where young and old are presented as almost different species, as when Juliet irritably declaims, "Old folks, many feign as they were dead, unwieldy, slow, heavy, and pale as lead." And there are moments where it seems like old and young don't really act all that differently. Juliet's hasty marriage to Romeo, for example, isn't much more precipitous than Lord Capulet's sudden decision to marry her to Paris. And Romeo's affections aren't any more changeable than those of the nurse, who, having cheerfully helped Juliet marry Romeo, just as cheerfully advises her to forget that first marriage and turn polyandrist by wedding as her father wishes, meaning marrying Paris and having two husbands at one time. Rosenberg might argue that even the adults behave like kids in Romeo and Juliet because the play itself is childish. But is Capulet really childish? Is the nurse? Surely you don't have to be young to be precipitate or fickle. Adults behave like children with some frequency, and vice versa. For Romeo and Juliet, in other words, youth and age seem less like solid, immutable categories than like tropes. Their devices, look that word up if you don't know what it means. That's what you should do if you're a good reader. Their devices manipulated by Juliet or Romeo to give force to their sense of indignation or specialness, or manipulated by the nurse to give force to her affection and nostalgia, or manipulated by Shakespeare to sweep adults into a romantic swoon, or manipulated by Rosenberg to denigrate that same swooning. From this perspective, the point of the play isn't so much the exhilaration of young love or the dunderheadedness of young love. Rather, as often with Shakespeare, the point is the language itself, the dazzling, disturbing, rhetorical force of old versus young, corrupt versus innocent, experienced versus naive. So that was a lot about the whole age thing, and he's basically just saying that the age can be whatever the reader makes of it. Alyssa Rosenberg makes it one thing, Shakespeare makes it something else, the characters make it something else. So I definitely urge you to look at the notes I'm writing on the side to help kind of understand what's going on. Rosenberg claims that Romeo and Juliet is dated because of the uncomfortable way its childishness and its child protagonists sit in our contemporary culture. I'd argue, though, that this uncomfortableness is not a contemporary addition, but is instead one of the things Shakespeare was writing about to begin with. At that first flirtatious meeting, for example, Romeo is masked with friends at a Capulet party. Old Capulet, seeing the maskers, reminisces about when he used to do the same. Capulet. What, man? 'Tis not much so, 'tis not so much. 'Tis since the nuptials of Lucentio, come Pentecost as quickly as it will, some 25 years, and then we masked. 'Tis more, 'tis more. His son is elder, sir. His son is 30. Will you tell me that? His son was but a ward 2 years ago. And then Romeo says, what lady is that which doth enrich the hand of yonder knight? Capulet slips back through time, and when he stops slipping, it is Romeo who speaks and goes to woo Juliet. Capulet was Romeo. Romeo is Capulet, and so by substitution, the lover of the daughter is the father. The mask is not a device not so much to enable young love as to enable the old to imagine young love. So he's just saying that Capulet up here is remembering when he used to be a player, like Romeo. So he's remembering being young and being at another masked ball like 25 years ago. So Noah Berlatsky right here is saying that Capulet used to be Romeo, and Romeo will eventually be Capulet, this kind of player who looks at other women. Last paragraph. In Romeo and Juliet, play acting with the categories of adult and child can lead to exhilarating delight, pleasurably moralistic revulsion, and sometimes to tragedy. If in our own day we have pushed the onset of adulthood past the tweens, past the teens, and even to some degree up into the 20s, that makes the play's insights and its sometimes exasperating perversities more relevant, not less. So he's saying we act younger, longer nowadays, so the play is actually more relevant than less relevant. Good luck with those graphic organizers.